For the past month, I have tried to achieve complete mediocrity by attempting to get the rank of Gold in Age of Empires 4. From my first few matches of multiplayer to learning a build order with the Ottomans, we've seen a noticeable increase in my ability to compete on the ladder. We've persevered through mistake after mistake to slowly yet surely complete our goal. Season 7 is finally here, and it's time to see how far we've actually come. But not only is it finally time to really test what I've learned, but it's time to see if all the advice the community has given me has actually culminated into something meaningful. Not only is this a reflection of my abilities, but also a reflection of the knowledge and the teachings that you've given me on this journey. You, YouTube commentator, are my Mr. Miyagi, and I am your Jaden Smith. But who cares about a shitty 15-year-old reboot? Because without further ado, let's just get into the placement matches for Season 7. There's a lot of matches, so let's just speedrun this bitch. We started the first match of the season with what I like to call the Ottoman SFB. This stands for Standard Fare Bullshit that we've come to know and love since the end of Season 6. Our first match was played on Forts, a map whose starting area is only slightly smaller than your standard New York City studio apartment. This led to mathematically unoptimal military school placement, which was not helped by the English longbowmen harassment. Treating this match like I do real life, I responded with minimal effort and built some towers. Unlike real life, however, this didn't prove as helpful as I hoped. In response to my towers, the English infantry built rams to batter them down, along with some totally optimally placed buildings. My best response to this was to mobilize the men, the women, and the children to— just kidding, this isn't Frostpunk. But we did draft our villagers to burn down the rams. In the background of all this, we still got a nice castle timing, along with slowly massing some Sipahi. With our first Meganol and our squad of cavalry, we routed the English's first strike. Despite surviving, our economy had taken a massive hit from the loss of villagers and time spent destroying the rams. I didn't know what to do, so using my brain to come up with a plan at 4,000 actions per minute, I decided to regain economic foothold by pivoting into a second town center. This proved to be beneficial as it kick-started our economy and we continued into the Imperial Age as initially planned. By this point in the match, the English Empire had gained control over most of the map and started taking sacred sites. Seeing as this was a little bit too close to the real-life English Empire, I just couldn't let that shit slide. Eventually, I decided to raid behind the enemy base. I was able to destroy some of their churches, which were full of relics, which I don't believe they ever actually rebuilt. Overall though, this raid wasn't super successful, mostly due to the English defensive landmarks that have a ton of range while being protected by the forts, really living up to their name there. Don't like it. Eventually, we do rebuild our army, and once we get to max population, the snowball has gone as big as it can get, and it's time to roll downhill. The task? Simple. All we had to do was protect the Great Bombards. Sipahi run interference, and we hunt down siege units as needed, and Janissaries, Janissary go better. We slowly reclaim map control and eventually destroy an English auxiliary town center. With overwhelming firepower, our enemy yields, and we get our first win of the season. Match 2 was going to be an Ottoman mirror match. Being the one-trick pony I am, I did what I do best, or at least okay, what I usually do. At this point, I've played the Ottomans enough that I can kind of tell what they are up to based on the amount of units that came from their early aggression. I could tell that they were producing units out of production buildings, which is kind of cringe if you ask me. I've never been fast, but I realized that this was a race and that I was ahead. Summoning the strength of Ranstappen, we castled before the enemy and barely imperialized before their castle age. We were ahead. The tech gap was so large at this point that the match had effectively moved from Ottomans to a fly versus a T-Rex with miniguns and laser eyes. Regardless, it was time to show the enemy who was the better Ottoman, the more Ottomanlier, you could say. The enemy placed palisade walls in what must have been an effort to prevent eco-raiding. This backfired as it created a bottleneck for both of our troops. However, through the power of mangonels, we were able to trap their units and use their buildings to our advantage. Once the military was dealt with, we used our great bombards to break down the wall, giving us line of sight of their main TC. With our barrels aimed at the town center, the enemy surrendered for our second win. Our T-Rex would not go extinct this match. Match 3, a classic English versus Ottoman matchup. Pretty standard besides the fact that there was actually no longbowman harassment. On our end, we did some very minor Sipahi raiding, because you know we're learning, we're all about that here, which actually did result in a handful of villager kills. With the confidence boosted of First Blood and a smooth progression through the ages, the real game begins. The enemy massed up a ton of man-at-arms and snuck past our military into our forward operating base of stables and blacksmiths. In fairness, I was also trying to use Great Bombards as stealth units, so fair game. The mass wasn't particularly effective, as we used our Sipahi to make quick work of the man-at-arms, and a lot of resources spent with very little damage done. With the usual composition, we started the slow push. Great Bombards and Janissaries destroy what they can at range, while Sipahi provide a wall for the Great Bombards or seek anti-siege. It felt like the flood of enemies would never stop, but once the villager mob came out to deal with my Great Bombards, the jig was almost up. With about 7 Great Bombards, probably about 3 too many, we didn't have to push very far to get a victory. At the end of the first session, we were 3-0, a great start to the season. Just over halfway through our placements, we were doing pretty well. In fact, by definition of the word, it was flawless. But just like real life, just because you start off well, doesn't mean you can't disappoint your parents later in life. Match 4. While wading through the tall grass, we encounter a new foe, the Byzantines. Shortly after reaching the feudal age, the enemy sends over some horsemen to harass my gold deposits. Reacting a little too slowly to this was my first mistake. The second mistake was being the lack of spearman production. Switching to Spahis resulted in a slower production and a less effective unit to counter the enemy horsemen. However, I was expecting an English-esque longbowman response, so I don't feel that bad. Going all in seemed to be a mistake, as by this time I got the castle, I really didn't have enough units to fend off the massive army of the Byzantines. After all these games, I had taken for granted relatively laxed enemies, allowing me to boom in peace. However, just like Icarus, it seemed I may have started flying too close to the sun. Our 5th and final placement match would also present us with a new foe, the Rus. The Rus are a civ that I simply just don't know how to deal with. For the uninitiated, the Rus gain a gold bounty by hunting animals on the map. This includes deers, wolves, and boar, with an increasing gold bounty for each one of those. In addition to this gold bounty, they also just receive a bounty points, I guess you can call it, that once they hit 3 thresholds, they receive bonuses for things like food gather rate and also the gold that their hunting huts generate. Oh yeah, I didn't mention, the Rus have special hunting huts, special mills that generate gold when placed next to trees. It's not a lot, but based on my advanced calculations, any number bigger than 0 is pretty good. I'm an engineer, trust me. The Rus really seem like they set the pace of the match, however, and it feels like in order to counter the Rus, which would be taking out the animals so they don't get the gold or the bounty bonuses, forces you to play the Rus's game. It feels like playing the Rus without any of the benefits. In fact, it takes away time from you getting more sheep to get food, safe food to your base. Learning a new matchup aside, I still played pretty poorly during this match and during my second session in general. And as you can expect from my Demi Downer, Negative Nancy, baby back bitching Betty tone, this match was a loss. Well, there you have it. 5 placement matches completed. But even more than that, a month of discovery and learning, failures and triumphs, the seeds have been sown, and reap the rewards of our harvest, and receive our Season 7 rank, which is 4 out of 5 placements. 2 and 2. What the fuck is this? As it turns out, sometimes your first match just doesn't count. Well, that means we have to play one more match, until we can actually get plays for this season. Our final, for real this time, placement match was against the French, but more importantly against an Xbox controller player. Now frankly, pun somewhat intended, this was just a silly match. The opponent went for a tower rush where they put the tower on my gold. They eventually tried to place a second tower by moving all of their villagers from the previous tower to construct it. I tried to contest this, but they got the tower off, but didn't place their villagers in it, meaning it couldn't attack. I put my villagers on wood so I could get my own towers and a barracks, and eventually found a new power of gold. They tried to create several more towers, but between my own towers and spearmen I had produced, there was no chance I'd let them get any more off. After destroying a few unconstructed towers and killing some of their own villagers, I got to my feudal age, researched siege engineering for RAM, and continued into the normal progression. At this point, I had realized that I had found someone who knew less about what they were doing than I did, so I moved my military towards their base, nabbing some eco kills on some exposed mid-map gold. After, I killed 2 of their horsemen and destroyed the barracks, and the enemy resigned. The map showed a ton of production buildings, yet the only military units ever produced on their side were the 2 horsemen. It was a strange way to end our placement matches, but at the end of the day, it was a win. Now, with all of our placement matches done, for real this time, we can finally see what rank I've achieved. Gold 1. We actually did it. I've become mediocre at Age of Empires 4, and my skill is just passable. I'm honestly surprised it took as short of a time as it did. I really thought this would be a longer journey due to my lack of experience with competitive RTS games. So the real question now is, where do we go from here? Do we try to climb the ladder higher and with different civs? Or do we try to get gold in other games and other genres? Or perhaps we have some single player challenge videos on the way? I guess we just have to wait and see. Thank you for watching.